Hello and welcome back to the Motorsport Baithak podcast. I'm your host Didi, and joining me today once again is my friend and your co-host Vedant. On this episode, we'll be talking about what we learned from 3 days of the Barcelona shakedown. Yes, Barcelona shakedown and not testing. So let's grab some chai, take our seats, ready our opinions, and dive right into the conversation. Hello Vedant, F1 season is finally off. 2022 is full steam ahead. How are you feeling? There has been so much news coming out of the paddock over the last week, a lot of developments going on. There's a lot to take in, but how have you been, and how were you able to cover, the 3 days of Barcelona shakedown?
Well, I think firstly that it is. I think on the website it's just Barcelona running, not even shakedown. So that's very strange, right? But yeah, I mean, in the end, these 3 days and overall the entire week was pretty exciting for Formula One. We finally got to see the cars somewhat, but we finally got to hear and read about the cars properly and what they are doing and what they are performing and what the teams might have to do in the next few weeks. So definitely very exciting times for Formula One, and I mean the conclusion from the 3 day test or running was pretty straightforward. That all the teams have been able to more or less get the things right. So yeah, I think in the end it's, as you said, full steam ahead now.
Absolutely, absolutely. But obviously, you can't talk about testing, shakedown, whatever happened over the last 3 days last week without mentioning the buzzword of the season. And obviously, the buzzword of the season is going to be porpoising or porpoising, however you want to say it. Obviously, it refers to the oscillatory movement of the chassis that bounces up and down basically due to aerodynamic effects. Now, some teams have suffered more than the others, and Mattia Binotto came out and said, and other team principals too, that they underestimated the effects of it. Now, the biggest question has been, how are the teams going to go ahead and resolve this issue? Now, from what we have heard, from the news coming out of the paddock and the comments, solutions do exist for this issue, as already seen up and down in with certain teams, and especially people who used to work in the 1980s era of F1, like Ross Brawn, have said that engineers who were in F1 then know how to go about solving this issue. But the real challenge lies in optimizing between eliminating the porpoising effect and managing the loss of performance. So that is where most teams will really struggle with this, challenge at hand. But it seems that McLaren, was the team that suffered the least from this issue. Although obviously that does not mean that they won't suffer from this issue as they continue to develop the car. And I think McLaren's technical director, I forget his name, but he came out and said that it's not through design that they're not that they haven't fallen victim to this effect. It has been a bit of stroke of luck, but it also goes to show that whatever they have done has been in the right direction. What were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I never knew that this effect, it was a phenomenon, something like this, right? So, I mean, we had ground effect cars in the past years, but we were not there to see them, obviously. And whenever we see or read, reviews like stories from the past, there's not much mention of the effect as such. So it was very interesting to see this thing, and for me, as a non-science student, it was very interesting to learn something new and all that stuff. But absolutely, the teams will need to work hard, very hard, to mitigate this and still retain performance. As you said, mitigating this will affect the performance, and no team wants that. The engineers would be willing to stay with this and maximize the performance, but obviously the drivers will have a huge headache driving 300 laps, 300 kilometers with this. So they do need to find some solution, and yeah, it's it's definitely the first thing, the biggest thing coming out of Barcelona.
Yeah, and what has made the situation worse is you can't use hydraulic suspension systems this year in
Yeah,
the new regulations. So that was something that the teams could have turned to and could have resolved this issue pretty easily, but that won't be the case. A couple things we have seen is that teams have made cutouts in their floors to reduce the amount of downforce. And things like that. But some other things that people have recommended is like a stiffer suspension. But all of those have once again performance trade-offs and stability trade-offs and things like that. But we'll see, what happens because the teams, as you said, have to get on top of this issue very, very quickly. Bahrain is only 3 weeks away, 2 weeks away for testing, and then another week or so for the season to get underway. However, talking about the cars once again, going into the preseason test, the barge boards were in the limelight because of the visible differences between the teams' designs. They stuck out to everyone, especially with Ferrari and Red Bull on day one, or during their filming days. We saw how different those designs were. However, the key area of development to watch out for will be the floors, as Sam Collins reiterated throughout the 3 days of testing. And that is obviously thanks to the impact that the floors have on the car's performance this year, obviously in lieu of ground effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, as everyone said, that the floor is essentially one big wing, and it is the most powerful aerodynamic element on these cars. So definitely, the development war would be highest on the floor, and that in fact will affect how the proposing challenge also goes about, and all these things. So definitely, and talking about the side pods, I mean, uh, with the Ferrari and the Red Bull designs and everyone else, with the newly launched Alfa Romeo, we could see that side pods more clearly. So yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting that all the teams could get a variety of designs with and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But now let's talk about the impact that these regulations have had on the cars, and what we have seen, or what we can make of the impact that they have actually had comparatively to the intended consequences that the FIA wanted and the teams wanted out of these regulation changes. Now, obviously, the number one question was, will following be easier? From the general consensus, it seems that following seems to be relatively easy, as intended according to the general opinion of the drivers. I think Charles Leclerc was probably the only one to provide a more detailed analysis of, how following other cars was. He stated that it was easier to follow behind another car between 1 to 3 seconds and up to 5 tenths of a second, but still difficult to follow if you were behind another car by 5 tenths to a second. So we'll only get to know the reality after race one at Bahrain, obviously. But on the other hand, George Russell also added, that it feels like the slipstream effect of leading car will be reduced. And something else that we learned through this was the fact that because of this, basically, the DRS has become a much more powerful tool in F1.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. See, we are all throwing like all these different aspects now, and obviously the purpose for the teams, like the purpose for the new rules, to make following easy, is definitely getting solved, as we can see. But then again, these new rules, as George Russell points out, that one, like, there are a lot of trade-offs basically, and I think with the new regulations, that is the best part, that the teams will have to make many decisions. The teams will have to make many difficult decisions as such, and then we might see some convergence. We might not see any convergence for the 2 years, but yeah.
Yep, and the second factor that would affect racing this year would obviously be tires. Now, F1 did an interview with Mario Isola, I think the technical or the chief of Pirelli's F1 division. So Mario Isola basically said that the new tires are designed with a different philosophy in mind. The new compounds are designed for less degradation, less overheating, and a wider operating window, so that the drivers can push throughout their stint, and there is not no need, but a lesser need to manage the tires too much. So basically, the drivers will be able to push on the tires, back off a little bit to recover the performance, and push again. And in theory, this, along with the ability to follow cars relatively easily, should make for exciting wheel-to-wheel racing. If all of this comes true, I think we're geared up for a really exciting season.
Yeah, I mean, as the Britishers like to call it, this is a double whammy. And so, I mean, absolutely, the new tires and the new construction, like, not only the design and size, but obviously the new construction is going to be very important for racing to be better. And as you said, all these things put together can make racing and entertainment the like we can potentially see the racing of I don't know 2008, 2009, 10, all those years.
Yep.
So
Well, the only other thing that comes to mind when talking about tires is, obviously Mario Solar talked about less degradation. So what that brings to my mind is, what will force a team to change tires, and the only way I see that's going to happen is that there will be a cliff-like, performance degradation of the tires after a certain number of laps, or things like that. So that'll be interesting to see how Pirelli manage that, and how that step change, uh, you know, basically influences the racing strategy across the season. So that'll be very interesting. Now, talking about tires, obviously we had some limited wet track running. It seemed that the track dried up pretty easily even in those cold conditions, but it did demonstrate the effects desired by FIS 22 rule changes that were materializing, and that the teams had not moved away from the intended consequences. Now, I won't get into it because it gets too technical, because it requires analysis of all the vortices and
yeah.
the aerodynamic flows over the cars that F1 and especially the tech people photographed and analyzed over the 3 day shakedown. But the general consensus was very positive coming out of it. But something that we can actually talk about without getting too technical is the trouble that the teams are having in meeting the minimum weight limit of 795 kilograms for 2022 cars. Now that weight limit is 43 kilograms heavier than that of the previous generation of the cars, and the reports coming out of the paddock suggest that there has been an aggressive push to increase the minimum weight limit of the cars because the teams haven't been able to meet this minimum weight limit requirement. Now that is very interesting. But also one other thing that I would like to point out is that the drivers won't be affected by this minimum weight limit because there is a separate minimum weight limit for the drivers this season, so they don't have to lose weight unnecessarily just to help their teams, be faster by a hundredth of a second.
Yeah, I remember Nico Hulkenberg was very sad about it in those days because he's a tall guy and I mean he probably was a heavy guy. That's why. But yeah, I think it's interesting because F1 increased the weight limit, the minimum weight limit, primarily for to make the chassis stronger, make safety requirements stronger,
Yep.
and but then again, there's as I said already, there's trade-offs, there's difficult decisions the teams have to make, and strangely, no, the weight is a factor once again. So we haven't seen weight being a factor for Formula One teams in
Yeah.
any of the years. So it's very strange.
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing.
That's that's definitely true. That's definitely true. Um, and one last thing on how these rule changes have impacted, the cars of this year. Now, it was expected going to the season that as a consequences of the rule changes, the cars would be slower this year compared to the previous generation. However, at the moment, all that can be concluded from the present evidence is that the cars seem to be fast, if not faster, around high speed sections. So straights and high speed corners, but definitely more sluggish through the slower sections. So it's going to be, I'm half expecting a lap record at Monza and a very slow lap at Monaco.
Monaco, yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see the two extremes of the car performance, throughout the season, especially at Monaco, which is one of the slowest, and Hungary probably, one of the slower tracks, and then going to Monza, and then the straights of Spa-Francorchamps and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We didn't see a lot of footage from for it, obviously, but from what we saw in a few random clips on YouTube and from what we have read, it's going to be very difficult for these cars to navigate slow corners. The cars were understeering in the last chicane section of Barcelona, and I mean, I think this part is going to be, in my opinion, is going to be the driver's skill, where the driver's skill comes in, because the teams can do so much, right, with the rules and with what they have on the table. So this part will come down to the drivers to make the most out of it, and surprisingly, like not surprisingly, but yeah, Daniel Ricciardo recently did a interview and he said that even though I make bold dive bombing moves, my natural, like he learned that his natural uh, driving style was gradually moving the car across the corner and not braking too late but braking earlier. So if he, like, from what I understand, I think Daniel Ricciardo has a lot more potential to make best use of this situation basically and perform better than last year in slow speed corners particularly.
Yeah, and there was also talk about how, Max Verstappen seemed to be driving in a different way compared to last season, where his movements were a lot smoother compared to last year, and so on and so forth. All people were almost calling him very extreme Jensen Button,
Yeah.
the way he was driving his new Red Bull. So obviously, there's a lot that we'll see, developing this year, both from the drivers and the engineers. But let's shift our focus to the teams. And when I say let's shift our focus, let's shift focus to those who didn't have the best running over the 3 days. Now, Alpine is someone who had very good running for the first couple of days, but struggled to find performance and reliability. I'm sorry, Vedant, but so much for Alplan starting the season. So obviously, while the top four runners from last year had a largely trouble-free shakedown, Alpine seemed to be relatively slower around Barcelona for the first 2 days of shakedown. It was speculated, I believe, that Alpine may have had trouble with the new engine rules requiring teams to run a new fuel mix and had to run the engine in a lower power mode, possibly running a lower rev limit. However, Alpine was finally able to unlock some pace on the third morning, but had an engine reliability issue as Alonso came to a halt with a very smoky back. And now you'll see this is the biggest paragraph in our notes, and that is there for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, Alpine had a, obviously they had a mixed 3 days. I think Laurent Rossi or their who like or their other CEO whoever the top brass is, this,
Look at
yeah,
him.
Luca De Meo. So one of them said that give me performance and don't think about reliability, right? And because they are arguably the weakest power unit in Formula One for a few years now, so that was the goal, and from what we can deduce, it has not gone to plan. So this is going to be a very difficult period for Alpine. But along with that, I think Alpine did not run their DRS at all for the first 2 days definitely, and for the third day as well. I guess so. There might be an issue there as well. So Alpine have a
Oof.
difficult task for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, definitely, and it comes at a bad time when it's come to light that Andretti are looking to join F1, and it is Alpine
Yeah.
or Renault that they have approached as an engine supplier. So definitely disappointing there a little bit from that aspect. But we won't talk about Andretti in this podcast. We'll dedicate a different episode to that. But let's talk about Haas. Haas had a rocky shakedown as it only managed a decent number of laps on day two, but it will be the off-track events that will worry Haas the most, as they may lose both their title sponsor and driver due to the sanctions imposed on Russia as a result of the war they've been waging against Ukraine. However, Gunther Steiner has stated that the team will be able to run without the Uralkali sponsorship, and Nikita Mazepin will be replaced by Pietro Fittipaldi before another driver is recruited. However, it was very disappointing to see the team with the most development time and possibly the most developed car not light up the track at all in any of the sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, the like as for expectations and as far as bridging the gap goes, the Haas was the one to look out for because they did not develop 2021 at all. They put all their money into repairs for 2021 or development for 2022. So absolutely,
I
it's
mean,
strange.
the car looked the most developed too,
Yeah,
with little bits and pieces here and there. They had a more developed front wing. The stuff around the halo was a little bit different and more developed. The floor seemed a lot more developed and whatnot.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But it's. I mean, every other team except for Alfa Romeo did meaningful running and did not get a lot of reliability issues. It's only Haas and Alfa Romeo who need to make up the most gap.
And Alpha is the Yeah, and Alpha is the other team with the most development time
Yeah,
from last year because they
absolutely.
didn't really develop their car
So
either.
the teams who have to make up the most gap and who did spend the most time on these cars have struggled with reliability. So that's pretty strange and concerning.
Absolutely. Now, although we cannot draw any real conclusions from the times seen in testing, we can conclude that the limited development time for finishing ahead of the rest of the field does not seem to have hindered Mercedes and Red Bull, even after last season's epic title battle, which required both teams to split the development time between the two seasons. And I think that is great news, but because looking at what happened from Barcelona shakedown, we might be gearing up for a four-way title fight between Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari. And I hope so much that it comes true.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we talked about this, right? Mercedes and Red Bull, even though have, they were the like they were developing the 2021 cars right till the end, and might have spent little less time on 2022. But in the end, these are the two teams that have dominated Formula One for the last 10 years, and you don't just go away from that. They have the
Yeah,
best
yeah,
engineers. They have the best uh, tech
tools,
tools, technologies,
processes.
and there
Yeah,
was also news that
exactly.
Mercedes were using some sort of AI to do their whatever testing and whatever, like whatever
Yeah,
it was. So
I attended on a different note. I attended a webinar recently, and it was hosted by uh, one of one of the F1 engineers. Not to name drop, but he did go ahead and say that that there is a lot of scope for development with AI and machine learning in Formula One right now, and if someone were to come in, they could possibly change the whole landscape of the sport. So it'll be interesting to see, which teams take that up, before any of the others and make use of it in the best way possible. But coming back to coming back to the issues at hand, obviously, Jolyon Palmer pointed out that Mercedes were taking a more holistic approach to testing. He pointed out specifically that Mercedes was the only team practicing starts through the 3 day shakedown, whereas he did not see any other teams do so. So that was an interesting observation coming out of the paddock, in my opinion. But what I'll say as a Ferrari fan is I'm most pleased to see that Ferrari did not run into any reliability issues, and I hope they're able to mount a title challenge. If not this year, then definitely next year.
well, Ferrari did complete the most laps, did they not? Right. So
Yeah,
right. So I think, as you said, Ferrari and McLaren look to have closed the gap to the top two, and George Russell believes so. So,
well,
well, we don't know what it is, right? But in the end, these are the two teams with the most potential. We know that. So, like, I don't know what we will see in Bahrain in a few weeks' time, but definitely it's
Well, I can tell you one thing that we can expect out of Bahrain, and that is mega upgrades from the top team
yeah,
Vedar.
absolutely.
Mercedes and Red Bull have already stated that they will be bringing a much more evolved car to Bahrain, which will possibly look very different to what they have run in Barcelona at the moment. Whereas Ferrari have stated that they will only be bringing minor upgrades, and the car will largely be the same, which is a bit worrying to me. But fingers crossed.
Yeah, like once again, these are new regulations. Every team is so from the biggest takeaway from these 3 days was that due to there not being a lot of reliability issues, most of the teams completed their primary correlation work and primary running that they had planned. Obviously, Mercedes went ahead and did practice starts and all those stuff as well, which is very interesting. But in the end, the top teams and even the midfield teams, AlphaTauri and Aston Martin, did complete all their goals, most of their goals. And so, like, even though AlphaTauri and Aston Martin, all these guys may not bring a lot of development and a lot more evolved cars to Bahrain, they will still bring a lot of knowledge and a lot of they will still bring evolution to Bahrain. So it's going to be very
Yeah, yeah.
interesting in Bahrain, and we will be able to see those 3 days on TV. And yeah, it's going to be mega.
Yep. Yep. Obviously, the Bahrain test starts on 10th of March. Drive to Survive is releasing on the 11th of March. And also, don't miss out on the Drive to Survive equivalent series for Formula 2. I can't, I think it's called Road to Victory or something. No, Road to Glory.
No,
I'm
yeah,
not sure.
I can't remember as
Whatever it
well.
is called, don't. It's a great series. Go watch it. Sorry about that, but shout out to the race, Autosport, and everyone else. Who were covering the Barcelona shakedown over the 3 days. It just didn't seem like we missed anything. F1 was also putting out a lot of content, surprisingly, but it just didn't seem like I missed anything besides just watching the cars go around and around. Obviously, if that would have been nice, but again, we're going to Barcelona and we'll have TV coverage in a couple weeks' time. So I guess you know for all the complaints that we have that we had regarding no TV coverage, I can't say that was it was good thing or it was necessary at all because I was busy here and I could follow whatever was going on regardless with all the social media coverage that there was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as you said, I could follow. For me also, I like again in Bahrain, I won't be able to watch the entire sessions the whole days. So I will just be following whatever the race puts out, and that's just what we did in the last 3 days. So yeah, the
But
yeah, I mean, yeah,
yeah,
I just checked that the F2 series is called Chasing the Dream, and it's on
okay, yeah,
F1 TV. So hopefully you can.
people can
Yeah.
find it. It's all right. It's all right. But yeah, it's been it was a great last week for F1. Obviously, we'll be covering F2 too this year. We'll do a little prologue for the F2 season also before it kicks off in Bahrain. But that's all from our side for this podcast. Any closing thoughts from you, Vedant?
Well, no, I mean, see the Barcelona running shakedown, whatever you want to call it, was very promising for the teams, for the drivers, and for us as well. So it's just now the time to, you know, just make that cup of chai and getting ready for that action.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the only disappointing thing out of Barcelona running shakedown was we didn't see a huge shake up in the order, or
Yeah.
we didn't because the lower teams didn't have great running. But we'll see what happens in Bahrain. Well, thank you, Vedant, for joining me once again. It's always a pleasure talking with you about F1, and we'll catch you on the next one after the next Bahrain test and before the first round of the F1 2022 season. Stay tuned for all the motorsport content on Motorsport Baithak.